19th. This is the executive committee meeting, and we have to make sure that we have quorum. So thank you very, very much. And we're going to get it started with our discussion on 140 Broadway. And I believe we are welcoming Jackson Wandress, who'll be presenting for discussion tonight. Yes, Jackson?
Yes. Thank you, Ken. So shall I share my screen or share my content?
Yeah, you'll see that you've gotten presentation controls.
Okay. To do that. So are you all seeing my screen with the plan view?
Yes.
To the beginning? There we go. Okay. So thank you all for putting us on the agenda for the meeting. Again, my name is Jackson Wandress. I'm the Director of Landscape Architecture for NV5. NV5 is the consultant that was hired by the owners of 140 Broadway to prepare the design documents for the reconstruction and waterproofing of the plaza around the building. As part of that project, we're making a number of improvements to the plaza. And one of them is we've petitioned New York City DOT, as you know, to place some of their standard city benches along the Broadway portion of the sidewalk between Cedar and Nassau Streets. You've seen this before. We had a design previously that drew some criticism for the apparent displacement of the food vendors that typically line up along that sidewalk. And so we were asked to reconsider the design and come back with a new one, and that's what we're here with today. So just to review quickly, this is the plaza circa 1970, empty and unencumbered. And this is the plaza as it looks most days throughout the year when the 6 vendors that typically line up along the Broadway sidewalk are there. You can see them from above. And there's always also the one vendor on the Cedar Street sidewalk as well. And how they line up, they pretty much block the view into the plaza or out from the plaza. And that was part of what we were trying to address, was opening up the view corridors to the park across the street. And so that brings me to the new proposed plan. So the last plan that we presented put up a string of benches, and there was no room for any vendors along Broadway. And we hadn't made provision at that time for placing them elsewhere on the property. Since that time, we've revised our plan. We're down to 5 benches. I think we had 6 the last time. And we've also, or I should say, the owner through their representative has met with the street vendor project and some of the vendors, some of these vendors in particular, and they've come to an agreement. And there's a letter memorializing that agreement, that the vendors will be allowed to relocate onto some of them onto the property itself, and at least one can relocate onto the Cedar Street sidewalk, and 2 can remain on Broadway, such as they are now. So we have 5 benches. They're clustered towards the center of the block on either side of those 5 benches. I'm going to use my little hand to show you what I'm talking about. In red are the 5 benches down the middle. These bars are the Canyon of Heroes markers in the pavement. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 benches. There's a 5x10 space for a vendor at one end and a 5x10 space reserved for a vendor at the other end. And then we have the minimum 10 feet clearance to the edge of the pedestrian ramp on the one side and the minimum 10 feet clearance to the pedestrian ramp on the other side. These 3 vendors will be allowed to set up shop on the Liberty Street sidewalk. This is, in fact, the property of the owner. It's not DOT right-of-way. The owner has given them permission to do this, and DOT has agreed to allow us to move the city bike stand further east down Liberty Street, and it will also get a little bit smaller, not quite as many bikes as are there now. And because we're removing this large black granite plinth monument to Harry Helmsley and replacing it with a flush plaque that's in the pavement itself, we can now accommodate 2 vendors on Cedar Street. So that's an addition of 1 vendor there. So we are still accommodating 6 vendors total on the Broadway Plaza itself. We've just moved 4 of them off of Broadway itself and placed them either on Cedar Street or Liberty Street. And as for the benches themselves, it's the standard New York City DOT city bench. This is their detail. We are proposing to use the backless variety of the bench. So it really will not obstruct view corridors at all. It's a really subtle and minimal piece of street furniture. That's a photograph of it in use up in the Bronx. So just 5 of these. They're 7 feet 2 inches long each. They accommodate 3 people sitting down, and they would just be attached to the granite pavement that's being installed as we speak. If you've been around, then you know that the plaza is already well under construction, and they are now starting to move into this area of the plaza with their granite paving. And so we need to sort of settle this issue so that we can or not get our permit from DOT to put these benches in. And with that, I'll leave it to you to ask questions or discuss amongst yourselves, whatever you see fit.
Well, Jackson, I know we will have lots of questions, so thank you so much. Can you, I'll go in order. I have a couple of questions as well. If the community doesn't ask them, I'll look back to the end. I thank you for putting that up. Can you put the diagram back up, please, to show and explain what was presented initially to where you are today and what those changes have been?
Oh, I don't have the plan handy that was presented previously. Originally, we started off presenting a plan that consisted of a combination of benches and freestanding planters. And they alternated and they literally lined the entire block, and there was no room for any vendors at all. I think the plan that we presented to the community board and the one around which the resolution that currently exists was crafted, but I think it had 6 benches, 6 or 7 benches. And again, there was maybe Lucy has that plan in his archive, but that plan did not leave any room for food carts along the Broadway sidewalk. The really big change from before until now isn't so much the redesign, because like I said, we've dropped the bench and we've squeezed them together a little more and made rooms for 2 full-size food carts to set up on the Broadway along the Broadway curb line. It's a pretty minor change to the actual design. The big change here really is that ownership of 140 Broadway sat down with the street vendor project and negotiated this compromise solution whereby the 4 vendors that are moved off of the Broadway sidewalk are guaranteed a place to set up business on the plaza just a few feet away, either on State Street or Nassau Street. That's really the major change here.
Isn't it illegal for them to set up in the POP?
Not if the owner agrees.
Okay, I'm going to go to my committees. We'll go Justine and then Alice. Justine, you're first.
Yep, I had it on mute. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so I guess I'm having a hard time, and I do recall that CB1 opined on this before. How many food courts were there before COVID? God knows how many are there now. But before COVID, there were 6. Is that an accurate statement, or were there more? I kind of think there were more. So that's my first question: does anybody know the answer to that?
My understanding is that there were typically 7, 6 along Broadway and 1 on Cedar Street. That's
yes, okay,
pretty common. I think sometimes a smaller one might squeeze in along Broadway, and you might see 7 there from time to time.
And how many will we have now with this new plan that you're proposing today?
There's room. So food cart spaces are allocated at 5 feet by 10 feet. That's not to say that the cart itself is 5 feet by 10 feet. So we've left 2 spaces at either end of this row of benches that are at least 5 feet by 10 feet clear. So 2 of the full-size food carts, the typical ones, the gyros and the food like that, can still remain here. Or you can have two small carts, you know, if you have a cart that, you know, is selling food, but somebody stands next to the cart, like a hot dog cart or something, you could probably
Well,
have.
Jackson, I believe the community was writing our resolution in support of the food carts that actually were making their business and making their livelihood there. So that's 7 people that are being, 7 companies, people, food carts, whatever you want to call them, are being displaced. And so you've made room for 2. You made reference to possibly at the largesse of the owner of 140 Broadway, I assume, allowing some food carts to be on their property, or is it across the street at the Brookfield property that they'll be
No,
allowed?
it's shown here on this plan. There are three
I'm terrible reading plans.
food carts.
Sorry.
Sorry, can you see my little hand moving?
Yes, yes.
So here's
Thank you.
1 food cart on Liberty Street, 2 food carts, 3 food carts, and an additional food cart across the plaza on Cedar Street.
So a
So-
total of 4.
Plus the 2 on Broadway here and here. So that's 6, which is what we understand to be there now. Now we're getting our information from the street vendor project.
Okay, well, that's helpful because they're the ones that,
Yeah.
And
All right.
I'll just butt in and say that the street vendor project is present at this meeting today. So
oh, good. So
Matt,
they could,
you have
will have
something
an
that-
ability
yeah,
to
if you
raise
need
their
to
hand.
jump in,
and say-
Matthew. Just raise your hand, okay?
Because I just want to make sure that we are representing them and representing their interests as what they need, because that's what they came to us to kind of fight for. And I thought our last resolution did that. And then I will defer to Betty Kay if she speaks up or wants to about the sight lines along the streets about crossing and what people in wheelchairs or people with strollers or whatever mobility challenged people may or may not have sight lines and blockage. But I'll leave it to Betty because she just has a much better take on it than I do. And I'm just I want to make sure that the space is there.
Are you
I just want
done,
to mention,
I'm
Betty?
done.
Betty?
first of all, just,
Betty? Alice goes next, and then you. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to need to sort of dial this back a little bit in history. I'm very sorry that the January 2018 Landmark Preservation Committee's work on this was not provided to the committee members, or maybe that was, but I didn't see it. And in that very hard worked out resolution, we were very clear about this particular question. And it had very little, in fact, to do with the food carts. This was, of course, a landmarks proposal. And I don't know if anyone remembers, but this is one of New York's most important POPs. It was done in 1968 by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and it's one of its most celebrated. And we had a sort of 2-page resolution on all the different details, which I see many were picked up by the Landmarks Preservation Commission's review of this proposal 3 years ago, and it's now underway. In no way was the design of benches or planters, and now only benches, ever part of the original design. The original design by SO1 was to be completely open, and it's something that was heralded by not just our community board, where we write very clearly, CB1 recommends, as the original plaza design did not include planters and benches on the city sidewalk on Broadway, that this element of the application be rejected. That was clear as day. And then I think we repeated again in the resolution you may have received, it's alluded to from April. Additionally, please be aware that the Municipal Art Society and the Landscape Architecture Foundation also opine similarly. So this gets beyond food carts, though critical and where people make a living, but really talks about the integrity of this plaza and where the community came down in 2018. And so if we are attempting to change this position, then we have to have a very good reason as to why. And so I just want to make sure people are aware of it. I don't know if Lucia wants to post that resolution, if it'll help folks. Unfortunately, we don't have any drawings of what was approved or the original plaza, but the idea here was for it to be entirely open. And as well, I will say that also the Noguchi Museum also, I think, opined at that time similarly. So I think we have to move away, not just from the food cart discussion, but also appreciate the idea that Landmarks was supporting, which was to go back to the original design of the plaza, which was completely open. So whether we approve by, what's very unclear to me, I mean, so that's just to give the committee this little background. What's very unclear to me is the point which you made, which was to say that, Jackson, that because the owner owns that property, he can do what he wants on the POPs or something to that effect. I would say au contraire. I'm not sure I appreciate that point, or maybe I'm not getting what was being said here. And I'm not, in that regard, understanding this relocation of food carts onto the plaza itself on the north side on Liberty Street. And maybe I'm just myself reading the plans wrong, but I see relocated food cart that is on the actual plaza. The jurisdiction of the plaza has always been problematic, as people are now aware, because DOT has jurisdiction over a certain portion of the Broadway side. That's, where we're running into trouble. But certainly, I don't understand what's going on the Liberty Street side. So I guess just to highlight 2 points. One, this board was adamant about not supporting the planters and benches, which were not part of the original design. And additionally, I would really like clarity on that point as to what the public is owed on this plaza and the allowance of whether it be bikes or food carts. And maybe I'm reading these drawings wrong also, and I apologize if that's the case, though I am an architect. But anyway, that'll do for now. I'd be curious, Jackson, if you could just explain what you mean with the owner owns it, he can put the carts where he wants, part of the.
Yeah, that's not exactly what I said. What I said is that that portion of the plaza is part of the tax lot. Okay, so the property line actually goes out into Liberty Street because Liberty Street was widened at some point in the past. It used to be much narrower than it is now. So while it is used as a sidewalk and everybody sees it and recognizes it as a sidewalk because people walk up and down along the curb line there, it is in fact private property out into the roadbed of Liberty Street. That said, again, ownership in writing has agreed to allow 3 of the food carts that currently do business on the Broadway sidewalk to relocate to these locations shown on this plan and continue to do business on the plaza. It's not a wishy-washy thing. It's not a we'll consider it kind of thing. They've agreed and they've put it in writing, and the street vendor project has signed on to that plan.
The question is not about the street vendors or this agreement. The question is whether or not you can put food carts on the plaza. And you're saying it's because you're inside the plaza backing up against the Noguchi with these 3 carts. I'm not sure I understand that. You're saying is allowed through what vehicle? Through the tax lot? I'm not sure I get this. I thought this was part of the plaza. And you're not on, in that diagram, that these things are showing up not on the street, not on Liberty Street, but inside. Well, why don't you tell us what the double line is next to the Liberty Street? What does that indicate? Isn't that the beginning of the plaza, of the paving or plaza?
That is the curb.
So you actually have 3 huge carts on the plaza itself.
At the curb line, yeah. All carts by definition, carts by rule to be 18 inches from the curb. They can't.
That we've never seen before, to my knowledge.
Alice,
that's
can I ask you a
crazy.
question? Jackson, do you need to go back to landmarks for that because you're in the landmark plaza and the landmark space?
I will check that, but I believe we have taken this back to landmarks. In fact, it's DOT's responsibility to show this to landmarks. So we understand in DOT approving this and having sent it to you, that tells us they have gotten approval for this from landmarks. That's my understanding. That can certainly be checked and verified. But again, to the best of my knowledge, this is approved by landmarks.
Jackson, could you do me a favor? We have our full board meeting next week. I'd like any documentation that you have that's pertinent to this for that. We'll need that for our full board meeting, because if we're asking that tonight, I guarantee the team from Landmarks, although Jason's here, he can speak for himself. But the other people on the committee will want to know. But with that, Alice, do you have any more questions?
I don't have any more questions. I think this has to be put on hold. Absolutely not enough clarity. This is, I mean, it's beyond egregious to see through food courts within, it looks like 30 feet of the Noguchi. There's lack of clarity as to what's pops and not. There's lack of clarity as to what to jurisdiction. I thought we were opining on 5 benches on the west side, which in and of itself, we've already as a board rejected. So I'm not quite up to speed myself personally, but maybe others are. I'm not the board here, obviously, but that's just where I'm standing on it. I would wait.
That is yours to say. We have Betty, Patrick, and actually, I'm going to flip it. Betty, Jason, Patrick.
If you'd like to have Jason go first.
Thank you, Jason. Betty, you want to go after Patrick next?
I don't remember I guess I have a question. First of all, I guess this is a landmarks issue as why we're seeing it, or it's actually become some other issue and we are truly past the landmarks part would be question 1. And question 2 is, an answer is, I don't remember seeing this version of it in a landmarks meeting. And I'll also say, maybe they could show us a rendering of the plaza or a picture from across the west side of Broadway showing the sculpture and the plaza and some carts in the plaza, like a little rendering, so we could understand that before the full board meeting. Bye.
Jackson, do you have any of those renderings that you can pull up and share with us this evening?
We do not have this new design rendered, no. The only rendering we have is from the very first proposal, and it shows benches and planters all up and down the sidewalk, and that rendering is now obsolete. We have not made a rendering of this new design.
Jason, we did opine on when they presented their initial plan in 2018, which is the one that Jackson's referring to, for which Community Board 1 stood on record rejecting all the benches and the planters. And Landmarks rejected all of the planters as well, and did allow them to resurface. And the planters are now not inside the pops, but are in the right of way through DOT. But that was also. Yeah.
I would just say, I think it's in the spirit of the landmarks law and how special this building is that we try and find a solution that also includes the vendors and the benches if possible, but the vendors are already there and the benches aren't, and is sensitive to this kind of absolutely crazy rendering that I'm envisioning of hot dog vendors next to this beautiful sculpture, which seems like a really crazy juxtaposition.
Okay, Jackson, you know what we're looking for before we go any further. I think Patrick is next, then Betty. Justine, if you have spoken and your hand's going to go down, that would be great. And then we have members of the public who would like to speak as well.
I just may have put my hand. I put my hand back up, if I can.
You're last. We'll come back to you. So
agreeing with Alice and Jason about the 3 food carts along Liberty Street, and in addition to their great points about that, that's a heavily trafficked pedestrian sidewalk corridor. We've lost a city bike station that was right there, which now looking at this, I guess that's gone forever. That's never going to come back.
It's east. He moved it east.
Okay. But I just point out too that the property owner should take into account is a number of school buses that use that specific corner as their drop-off spot. Having 3 carts in that location presents a great conflict. But again, echoing and agreeing with Alice and Jason on the aesthetic point and whether it's permissible even to put them there.
The school buses, but I know that entire curb lane along that curb line is signed for federal parking for the federal, what is it? The Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Police have that entire lane at their disposal. So I've never seen a school bus there. I can tell you that much. So I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about.
So you should look around 4 o'clock on any given afternoon, and anywhere between 3 and 4, 3 to 5 o'clock on any given afternoon. Guarantee you're going to see it.
Jackson, this is part of what I've always in a lifetime said, that community-based planning from community up for those who use the streets and know the streets are always better than top-down dialogues. But on that note, after Patrick was Betty. After Betty, we'll go to the public and then come back, Justine, for you. Okay, Betty.
Thank you. Yes, no, I think it should go to the DOT. I'm talking to Tammy here now, to clarify that this isn't actually acting as a right of way, because they are certainly acting on it. Hence the revocable trust, the revocable consent coming from the DOT about this space. So I agree. This probably is controlled by the DOT and is right of way. Even though it might be technically owned, something probably happened when they went into the roadbed with the property line. Anyway, I want to say the elected officials asked that 6 food carts be guaranteed. So just to remind people what the letters said, since that was a question before. To Justine, yes, as long as the food carts are kept at the 10 feet that's being left. That's just a matter of where they place them, the individual vendors. There would be a sight line for across the street for people who are short like me on scooters, or just plain short because they're young. As far as I wanted to let you know too that I do strongly support the benches. One, especially with an aging population, it is very appreciated to have a place to sit down and rest. I don't think I can state that enough. And if you look at Gail Brewer's report, the growing number of percent of people who are elderly in Manhattan is due to go to over 20% in this decade. So to begrudge them space would be a little bit mean-spirited if you think you're speaking for the community. Second of all, I have a dentist at 150 Broadway, and I mentioned this to them last month when I was there for an appointment. They were ecstatic about benches in this location. They said, finally, somebody's doing something. This is wonderful. So it was not only just, oh, that's okay. They were ecstatic about it. The dentist, the office staff, everybody, the hygienists, they were uniformly thrilled. So I want you to factor that in too. That's the Westinghouse building is on the next block, and their comments about having to go across the street. Sorry, the name of it? Yeah, the plaza across the street. Anyway.
Zuccotti Park.
Zuccotti Park was talking about having to avoid the pigeons of Zuccotti Park. They were so thrilled. But anyway,
That's
the preference.
again, gotcha. All righty.
Oh, but that's a community point of view.
Right, absolutely. But then they need to opine and say something, it's hearsay otherwise. No, right?
Yeah.
But I do appreciate that. I'm glad that they've left the space around the crosswalks as Betty. That was a major concern from the first conversation we had. So that's a definite improvement as well as the letter with the vendors. Okay, let's go to Bo August, who is a member of the public. Gerald Forsberg is next, who is a member of the public, and then we're going to come back to Justine. So, Lucian, if you can unmute Bo first. Bo, you're unmuted. Welcome.
Hi there. Full disclosure, I am a representative of 140 Broadway, so I represent the owner. And I myself and Matt Shapiro and Mohammed Atia spent a number of hours on the different options. So I want to take a minute just to remind everyone that the instruction back a year ago when we had this meeting was to find suitable locations on the plaza to retain all the food carts. And so we took that direction seriously, and we sat down, and it took a long time to figure out what makes sense for everyone involved. The plaza extends all around the building, but we didn't want to put the food carts in a situation where they were on the east side of the plaza. So these locations you see here made the most sense for all parties involved. We talked about how we have the food carts, we keep the bikes to the committee member that said we take away the bikes, we keep the bikes, and we add benches. So everything stays, plus we add benches, and I feel like we tried to develop a situation that was a win-win-win for everyone. In addition, this design here shows the 3 food carts on the side of the cube there on the Liberty Street side, and there was a concern brought up by Alice that they're next to the cube. They're actually the cube, it opens up a view corridor to the cube from Zuccotti Park. That's how we thought about it, that by shifting those carts over there, it opens up that view corridor to the cube and also allows the lines, a lot of the people that work in the building frequent these food carts, and it allows the lines to go north-south, the food lines to go north-south rather than east-west and cut through that Broadway sidewalk traffic. So there's just another benefit that we saw to this. It's also not a permanent structure, so I don't know that Landmarks would have jurisdiction. We're not putting food carts there, food vendors there. We're allowing open space there that can be filled by a food vendor, and so that's an important distinction to make. We are not placing the food vendors there. We're placing open space there that would allow for a food vendor to vend there. And I think Jackson mentioned this at the beginning. It's important that we have a decision now rather than last year we kicked the can down the road. We had good direction from you guys. We took that direction seriously and came up with this plan. But this is a go or no go for us now because we are under construction in phase 4 out of 5 phases. And we need a decision by this committee at this meeting tonight in order to move forward with this, because the lead times for the benches, the lead times for the concrete, and the schedule of our project. So I just needed to make that statement as well. So that's all I have. Thank you, guys.
As the owner's representative on the call, can you answer our questions that were asked to Jackson in terms of whether or not DOT and Landmarks have provided any formal guidance and information to you about the structures?
The structures that we are proposing, the 5 benches, are not in Landmarks jurisdiction.
And they are not because?
They're not on the plaza, they're in the public right of way.
Okay.
I
Stick
think,
with
honey,
us, don't.
I'm
stick
sorry.
with us. Hold on, Alice.
Yeah, sorry.
Stick with us. Don't go anywhere, Bo, because I know we're going to need you for more questions. So just stay there if you don't mind. Gerald, you're next, and then we'll come back to Justine, Alice, and keep going. Gerald, you are almost unmuted. Lucian, can you unmute him? There you go.
There we
Welcome.
go. Yeah, hi. I going back to the 1970s photograph, I can understand the intent to open the views as a pretty key motivator here for this whole project. The food carts definitely block the views, and I'm wondering if there was any consideration for movable tables and chairs in the plaza itself rather than benches. I'm just thinking back to the study that was done on the Seagram Plaza years ago, and it was found that pedestrians preferred having chairs and tables that could be moved around a little bit. And I would just also say that I don't see the intention of the open views actually being fulfilled with having 2 street vendor carts on the Broadway side. So my only question is, did you consider movable tables and chairs in the plaza instead of fixed benches? Thank you.
Can I offer a reply to that? You're muted, Tony.
Either Bo or Jackson has to answer that. I would prefer that it's Bo because he's the owner's rep. So Jackson may not know.
I mean, we have to balance the intention of the original plaza, which is a completely open plaza, a clean, flat plaza that goes up to the building. So we have to balance that approach with the approach of the V corridor. And so tables and chairs don't fit with the original intention and aesthetic of the plaza being a flat plane up against the plane of the building.
And I would, that being that what we are discussing here is the public right-of-way, the actual sidewalk. If we did not put the benches here, food carts would be entitled to set up here. So you would end up with a wall of food carts anyway. I think you would end up now with 10 food carts on the plaza, for example. So you would lose that objective. You would lose that benefit of having opened the view into the plaza from across the street. You know, the connection, the visual connection between Zuccotti Park and this plaza would be lost both from within the plaza and from across the street if you took those benches out. Because this project and 6 vendors that are there now cannot prevent more vendors from setting up in a legal spot on an open sidewalk.
Can I also address the question about why did we leave open spaces for the 2 vendors on Broadway? The reason being is when we were talking to Mohammed and Matt about this, they said that was very important for their food vendors to be at those locations because those are premier locations, kind of those closest locations closest to the corners were premier locations. And so we said, yeah, that makes sense to us to have those vendors there. And I think Matt is on the call, he can attest to that as well. But that was the reasoning, that it's important to the vendors to be close to the corner.
I just want to reiterate what Jason had and others have said here too, which is, you know, taking the 1970s photo and just photoshopping where these vendors and the benches are going to be would be extremely helpful for everybody, including, I would have thought, LPC.
I don't disagree with that.
Well, again, to the best of our knowledge, we've been told by DOT that their typical normal process is to liaise with LPC. So it's our understanding that that has happened and nobody asked us to create a rendering and nobody objected. So that's why we're actually.
And Tammy, is there anybody here from DOT to speak to this tonight?
No. So just so you know, Jackson and Bo, the inclusion of the benches were something, and the exclusion of the vendors were the 2 topics that we commented on. And we have comments on the benches, both in 2018 and in 2020. So it is not unknown. Yes, it was far worse in terms of business and equity, getting rid of the food vendors. But we did comment all along that we did not feel that this necessarily was the right thing. And it was said in 2018 and 2020. So while this is in the public right of way, which is a DOT purview, Landmarks commented on it in their ruling to you as well, saying because it was off the plaza, and in DOT, it would be handled separately, but they weren't a fan of it either at the time. So I'm not sure what DOT and Landmarks worked out, but Landmarks said it wasn't theirs because it was DOT. But it did sort of spirit of the law, letter of the law kind of a conversation here. We're going to go to Justine and then to Alice again.
Thank you. Sorry. So I guess I'm acknowledging everything that Alice has said and Patrick and Jason about the landmarking and the open space and kind of keeping the historical perspective. But then I go back to the food carts and the food vendors, whatever, and just worry about them because what I'm concerned with is that there's no place for them to go.
Alice, I mean, Justine, I'm sorry.
I don't know if that's the answer. So that's back and forth. And I don't know if I could just say the question and then I'm done. I push it to Alice to ask, is by what you're saying and objecting to the food carts where they're being moved to, whatever else, is it an objection to the food carts themselves, or is it objection to the placing them there, or is there anything that can be accommodating to everybody? I don't know the answer.
Well, let me answer quickly that in one thing, if you had looked at some of the materials we sent out, the food cart vendor association supports this plan. So they are 100% on board. So
Yeah.
they're not a concern in terms of that discussion. The other discussion, I'm going to have Alice answer because it's
Yeah, because I want to figure out is if this plan is what's being supported by the food vendors, is what Alice and Patrick and Jason saying in opposition to this plan, is there no room for the food vendors to be siding with Alice and Patrick and Jason? And that's my question. I get what you're saying, that they like this plan. I see why. It keeps pretty much everybody there.
okay.
That's the
So
question.
just
Just pace it out in my head.
let's let Alice answer, and then Patrick's got his hand back up, and then we'll go from there.
So to be clear, if you didn't have the 5 benches there, Justine, and maybe even if they are there, you pull up the same carts that are there today, and that's what you've got. So all the food cart people can stay, and you haven't compromised the plaza, particularly at night or on weekends when the carts aren't always there or whatever, and you sort of respond to criticisms that were given by, major thoughtful think tank folks like Landmarks and and MAS and the Landscape Architecture Foundation, who, and many other groups who all opine that there shouldn't be anything on the plaza. So that, in answer to your question, they would remain, I guess. If you advocate for, having the benches, do you give a little more space that people can actually access the carts? I don't know enough about that plan. I can barely read it just because it's very small on my screen, and we haven't had a conversation. What is fundamentally really egregious and very problematic is this addition of 3 carts on the plaza that I don't think, at least have never seen before, and I'm not sure any other agency has seen. And so I think before we could, it was one thing to accept the 5 benches, which is, I thought, what was at stake here, and is the only thing this board has really talked about were benches and planters earlier on, is now 3 carts on the plaza, albeit they can be removed. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, Scott Stringer in his ops audit pointed to the fact that city bike stand was not supposed to even be on the plaza. I may be wrong on that, and forgive me, but I will do some due diligence here to look that up. But I think we need great clarity as to whether you can start putting food carts, much like we're now seeing at 200 Water Street. We've got now an entire city bike station there, and now we're going to see food carts on some of our most celebrated, iconic, memorable Pops plazas. This is major to me, this particular move of the 3 on Liberty Street. So I just offer that up. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I think we would have to take that as a separate resolution, because the 3 food carts that you're talking about have nothing to do with the DOT application, which is about Broadway and the benches. While it is related, it's, death by 1,000 cuts in the conversation. It is not related to the application, and the application is for the benches in the right of way. So I understand how related it is, but understand it's the spirit of the law, the letter of the law. And right here, where we need to opine is about the benches on Broadway. We can certainly send a letter, and Bo is hearing us loud and clear about the concerns about having them inside the plaza. I don't know what can happen. So you've said your response to Justine. Let's keep going. We've got Patrick and then Matthew Shapiro from the public.
I just wanted to quickly respond to what Justine had said. It's not about the vendors necessarily, but about the placement. That was my question and concern primarily, because it seems to be kind of congested in that area, and there are other conflicting uses. But that was before the owner's rep Bo had a chance to weigh in as well, which I thought was very helpful. And I accept and appreciate those comments, particularly that this was more or less a negotiated resolution with the street vendor project. And so, I guess I don't have a major objection to it after hearing that, and appreciate those comments coming in. But that's just to answer what Justine was questioning.
Yeah, because that's the compromise, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I understand it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And nothing's going to be perfect, but I accept that it's a negotiated compromise. I would just ask that the owner and the street vendor project also think about how to space those out as much as possible to really make it work, because there are other conflicting uses there. As I mentioned, there's the school bus pickups and drop-offs that are there. They are there, as well as, pedestrians and hopefully, God willing, tourists very soon.
Exactly. All right, Patrick, thank you. Justine, thank you. I think you got everything you need. Matthew Shapiro is in the public area. If you don't mind unmuting him. Matthew, welcome and thank you.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Sure.
can.
Great. Matt Shapiro here from the Street Vendor Project at the Urban Justice Center. I agree with Bo. We did do a lot of work and talking about spacing, and we agreed that this was a compromise, keeping the vendors in the plaza. I can't opine on anything else about other than keeping the vendors there. So the only thing I would ask is that if you, I don't know what you're going to do, but if you do a resolution in support of this, that you would just put something in about the agreement that we have with the building that would keep the vendors in the plaza, that would keep the vendors there on Cedar Street and the other one on Liberty Street and the other one on Cedar Street, just so it's in the record. We asked DOT to do the same thing, and we're going to include, so they're going to include the letter with the agreement also in their record. So that's the only thing I would say if and when you draft a resolution, to have like a line in there about that. But otherwise, I'm happy to answer any other questions if people have them.
It's a darn good thing you're here because you could speak to the concerns raised by the community board. Already, there are concerns about the Liberty Street side. Some of them you cannot fix because it's an agreement that has been struck with the landlord about allowing you to be on the plaza. But you can certainly understand the concerns that we have about school buses that we know from a user perspective absolutely positively drop off on that corner.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky for me because, or for us, I understand those concerns. This redesign of the plaza was not our idea. It was not the street vendor's idea. We understood that the building wanted to do certain things, and that would require the relocation of some of the vendors. So, we're okay with those three vendors going to Liberty Street. The vendors are okay with that. So I can't really, it's hard for me to say like, oh, well, there are also school buses there. Like, I understand those concerns, but the only thing I can really talk about is we're okay with them being moved because it wasn't our idea to move them. It was the building's idea with this plan about benches, which, okay, we're trying to come up with a compromise. The only thing I will say is that before the city bike was there were vendors there as well. So that's the only really thing I can say about that. In our opinion, we should either accept this plan with the 2 vendors on Broadway and 3 on Liberty, or we should not move the vendors off Broadway and come up with some other plan. But I know the building wants the benches, so we were okay with that, and we came up with this agreement. So that's why I think you'll see that we support it. We support this plan because it keeps the vendors there.
Okay. Moving along. Patrick, is your hand still up? I see Pat Moore. Pat, you have not spoken yet, and then we'll go back to Patrick, back to Alice, and then we have to make a decision on how we're moving forward.
Just to address what was just said, I don't remember vendors being on Liberty Street before. There was always an ice cream truck there before the bicycles came. I don't remember there ever being vendors on that corner before. They were always on Broadway, but I don't remember ever seeing a vendor on Liberty Street.
Lucian, can you unmute Matt so he can speak?
Oops.
Yeah, I am muted.
Oh, I'm here. There were a line of vendors there. I'm just trying to look up this article or some photos or something where I can prove it. But we had a whole issue because the city bike station was going in. The vendors had no notice, and it basically put them out of business. I have a Gothamist article. I don't have any photos really. I don't know how to put this in the chat. Well, I think I put it to the host
I've lived.
Anyway,
Well,
there
I
were
don't
vendors
remember.
there that were displaced by the city
Okay.
bike station. 100%. I was there with them protesting, so.
Okay, so Pat, do you have anything else on that? She's looking while she's thinking. Bo, are you hearing the concern and angst we've got going on here? You're unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. But can you restate it concisely? There's a
Yeah.
lot of,
There are several concerns that we're hearing. One of them is about a permanent change to a POPs, which is not something that we're looking for because we certainly don't want anything that's precedent setting. Let's
Can
be
I
really honest.
yeah, let me take that one. So a permanent change. Currently, if we were just to, let's say, move the city bike, which this is what this plan calls for, we would have the exact same situation there. And that's evidenced by the fact that before we did started construction in phase 4 on the western side of the plaza, we did have to remove that city bike, and there were food vendors that immediately set up on Liberty Street. So the point is, food vendors will set up there regardless of what we decide tonight on the benches.
Okay. And you hear what we're saying about the setups on the west side and the access way to the sidewalk due to the school buses and everything else.
School buses on Liberty Street, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So like I said, I don't control where the food vendors set up. We're just leaving open space there. And if the food vendors, and we're saying if the food vendors set up there, we will not displace them. And we could certainly put them on the east side, but that is not a good place of business. Their best business is done closest to the corner of Liberty and Broadway and closest to the corner of Cedar and Broadway. And we respect that. They're in a business. They have a business to run, and their customers are out on Broadway.
Can I make an observation at the school bus issue?
Absolutely, please do.
If school buses are arriving around 4 o'clock, maybe they are better off with 3 food carts there rather than a line of 45 bicycles. I know that the bike station is not always full of bicycles, but they don't start to disappear until about 5 o'clock when people get out of their offices and start taking them. So if you've ever walked past a bike share station that's full of bicycles, it's impenetrable. You cannot walk through it because the handlebars almost touch each other. So I would just offer that there is the possibility that this design could even be more permeable, more porous in terms of pedestrian flow at 4 p.m. because some of those vendors might not be there at that time.
Nice sales job, Jackson.
Can I jump in? Because that's a terrible sales job. Jackson, you can't see over those things. You just can't see over them. It's worse than having an impenetrable bike lane there. I'm telling you this from personal experience. My own kids' bus stops there. That's how I know that.
Patrick.
Not packed with patrons at the moment creates a huge congestion and pinch point. Sorry, I apologize.
No, absolutely no apologies necessary. I was going to tell you you're cutting out. So here we are. Bo, I really do wish that you had heard some of the concerns that we raised beyond just the food carts to come up with something that was a little bit better than this. So I'm going to ask the committee and see where we want to go. Right. This is an application for the right of way. It's not, we are not opine, DOT does not care no offense intended, about where the food carts are. That's been a conversation between the Food Cart Alliance, Matthew, and the building. DOT didn't care about that to start with, I would say, because it wasn't in their realm. So we need to vote on whether or not we think the 5 benches are fine. We want less benches. We want more benches. We don't like any of it. We do need to give something to DOT and for the building, because they've already ripped up the plaza. It's already being renovated. So this is the last part of the renovation plan.
Can I
Al,
jump in here?
Yep.
I don't agree with you, Tammy. This is a plan we're asked to vote on, if I'm understanding correctly. And this plan has on it, not just 3, but I'm missing something. Do I not see an existing cart location also on Cedar Street, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these carts on the property. So we're not just of the 5 benches in red, but in fact, these other elements. And, you know, right from the beginning was understood that this proposal provided by the bank was simply a way to get the food carts off Broadway, which in fact is probably the best and most lucrative spot for them. And one would say, why not keep them there? And I frankly don't have enough belief that the reason is, you know, that convincing. I understand the bank wants to get rid of them, and these are the machinations to go through. But I think we have to be really careful that we are voting on this plan. And this plan does show 4 food carts on a public plaza. And without having the Department of City Planning and having the Landmarks Preservation Commission approve plans, I really feel we do a disservice to this board. So
Landmarks has said already publicly that they do not opine in the public right of way on this. They already said that was out there. So we're not going to be able to wait for a ruling on Landmarks on that aspect. Now, Landmarks certainly would have something to say about the carts being on the inside of the pops. Absolutely. Absolutely 100%.
What I said, Tammy, sorry, wasn't to get a landmark ruling. They have ruled, you're correct. What I'm asking for is clarity on the idea of placing food carts on a public plaza. And was Landmarks part of that process? They would have directed it perhaps. Where is DCP on this? It seems unclear. And it is not just 5 benches that we're talking about here. So that's all I'm pointing out. I think it's really something that's a little bit bigger than that. So that's all I was saying. And also, if in voting for this, should the committee decide, I would like a really clear understanding why we are voting against something that at the time, 3 years ago, we were very clear in stating we did not approve this addition of the 5 benches and the planters. You could argue that we now approve just the benches without the planters, that's fine. Or that this argument about needing to find new homes for the carts is fine, but then you're accepting that these carts could end up on a public plaza, and that really does open up a tremendous can of worms. So that's all. These are not on a street; these are on a plaza. So I just, you know, whatever jurisdiction is over these edges, I just hope that everyone sees it, because it's, you know, it's definitely precedent setting.
I would agree with you, because it's not, if it was just about the 5 benches, it'd be one thing about the benches, but they've gone beyond what their application for DOT has done to work on other things. So with that.
Also, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify that it's 3 benches that would be on the plaza on the private property. The food cart that we're showing proposed, the second food cart on Cedar Street, that's on the sidewalk. That's also in DOT right of way. So again, if you look at the hand, this is DOT right of way. Right here is the property line. So these 2 food carts are technically in the right of way. The only food carts that would actually be in the place would be these 3 on Liberty Street. Just wanted to make that clear.
You're either in the box or out of the box. So yes, thank you, Jackson. We're not talking about 5 in the box. We're only talking 3 in the box, but that doesn't change the fact that it is precedent setting for a change in a usage for the way the pops operate. Matthew Shapiro, you still have your hand up. Is there anything else you want to say? If not, I would ask if you could please take that down. You're
Oh,
you're open.
sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to do. Okay, I think it's down now.
Yep. Thank you. Okie dokie, people. All right, let's get moving. We need to opine on this. It can be done in one resolution. It can be done in two resolutions. It can be done together. It is an application. Lucian, repeat the application, or Betty.
Application for revocable consent for the DOT to add street furniture to the right of way along Broadway.
Could you identify which drawings go with the application and which ones we're opining on here? Because that's really critical.
I believe what you see, Jackson, is what you're showing. The in red is what this application is considering. You are muted, sir.
I'm going to show you now the 4 actual drawings that comprise the revocable consent package. There's an application page that the owner signs. Then there are these 4 drawings. Actually, somebody mentioned this earlier. I also want to make clear that the letter that is signed by both the owner of the building and the street vendor project, that letter is now also an official part of the application package added by DOT. So you have the application, you have these 4 drawings.
But can you show us? Okay, you are showing us the 4 drawings.
Yeah, so I'm just.
And to members of the public, there's a link on live.mcb1.nyc, which will take you to a site where you can look at these files yourself.
Right.
So these all show the food carts. They all show the food carts. They identify them with arrows. They are part of the plan, and the red is simply saying what your construction is showing.
Could you show the pictures again, please? That go with this. So yep, that one. Can you make that larger? The plot plan.
Want me to scroll down across these pictures?
So stop where you are right now. So right there, east of the crosswalk, you're talking about 2 vendors there, correct? That's the crosswalk at Liberty.
That's the crosswalk at Liberty. So our plan is showing 3 food carts. You can sort of see the beginning of the bike share station. Well, you can see the beginning of the bike share station because that's the pay station right there in the photograph. So there'd be 1 food cart there, and then 2 they're down to the left.
Next photo. You only have 1 cart that is in that photo. Is that exactly where the cart would be according to your new diagram as well?
Pretty much 10 feet from the edge of the flare on the pedestrian ramp. So that's about right. Yeah.
Okay.
You actually also see the trash compactor here, and that's going back into the same location where it is now after the construction is complete. So this food cart's pretty accurately placed. The other one would
the trash compactor is a thing in blue.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a double.
Yes. And then there was the possibility of a second food cart to the right, my right, looking at this, of the east of the food cart that's there, correct?
He's talking about benches next to the food cart.
Yeah, you'd have benches all through here. So this would be open, visually open, and then you'd have another food cart down here somewhere.
Next photo. So in this photo, you're talking about replacing the 3 green carts in the middle with benches. The red cart on the left and the blue cart on the right would remain, correct?
There's probably 1 more food cart to the right of this blue cart behind this box truck here on the photo. So we'd actually be replacing all 3 green ones and the blue one and you would have the red one, and you would have the one that we can't see in the photo because it's behind the box truck about where I have my cursor now.
Next photo. That would be completely covered by food carts, correct?
There'd be one food cart pretty much right where we're looking now. Maybe a little bit to the left, because I think the it's pretty close here to the flagpole. So there'd be a food cart in this general sort of foreground, blocking the view to the door to the this Harriman. Is
Okay, next photo, please.
there another one below this? Not
There's
sure.
one to the right. Slide your cursor over on the page. There you go. So on that corner, there would be a food cart to the left of the sidewalk, crosswalk, and there
Over
would
here.
be a food cart vendor on Cedar, correct?
Yeah, we don't see it here, but to the right, off the screen, off the photo edge, there'd be two food carts going down this way.
Is there any consideration for 3 food carts on Cedar and 2 on Liberty?
We get to the big granite planters on Cedar Street. If I go back to the plan view, I can just point that out real quick. Let me just,
It's 2 that are there already. You're not moving them, right?
there's one on Cedar Street now.
There's 1 planter or 2?
The planters are on Cedar Street, and there's 4 of them total. They're the big granite boxes that you've seen before. So this is the beginning of the first planter here on Cedar Street. So this food cart now is actually the existing food cart is about where this one is shown. And the second one doesn't show up there now because it gets too close to the Helmsley Monument, and you would have a tight space here. But this is going away, so now we have room on Cedar Street for a second food cart. So that's what we're showing here. But the planter here, we've got 10 foot clear from the planter, and then another food cart.
And I think the question that I asked was to alleviate and take them out of the POPs, which is something that we're not really thrilled with, but we want to support the business, obviously. Is there an opportunity to put 3 of them on Cedar and 2 on Liberty and encroach less on the POPs?
Possibly. We could move this one. Well, first of all, they should be back by the curb. I'm not sure why we're showing 3 feet typical from the curb. I think it's because there's a couple of bicycle racks over here. But if we move these cars back to the curb and pulled this one west to where it was 10 feet from the very edge of the ramp, you might be able to squeeze 3 in along the curb line by putting them together and not maintaining a gap between them. You might squeeze 3 in here. It's a possibility.
And Bo, is that something and that the building would consider? Lucian? Yeah, hi, Bo.
We would consider it, but, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of the street vendor project, but I think Matthew would say that we don't want the vendors to be squeezed in there, and because they have to move these carts in and out, it's a difficult position for them to be in if they have to squeeze 3 into a tight area like that. So we would support that, but I would go to Matt and see if he would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, they're all squeezed on Broadway right now, butt up against each other, so I'm not seeing the issues there. But Matt, if you're still on, if you can comment on that, I'm trying to find something for consensus here to try and ameliorate some of the concerns I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to, we didn't have that proposal before, so we'd have to talk to the vendors about it. I don't work there, so I can't tell you what their answer would be. Unfortunately, we would really need to ask them, because it's a sensitive issue for them, as you can imagine. It's a sensitive issue for everyone involved, and we spent a lot of time talking with them and meeting in the plaza and coming up with the designs, and so we'd have to talk to them about it. and see what they said. Yeah, sorry, I can't tell you for sure.
Gerald, is your hand still up from before? Lucian, if you could mute both. Gerald, is your hand still up?
No, I just have one final question. These vendors that are being moved to private, basically private land, even though there's a POPs involved in it. I mean, are they going to be charging rent, being charged rent now?
No, no.
Never. I think
No.
that needs to be clarified in whatever resolution comes forward.
That's not our purview in this. I hear where you're going, but there's an agreement that's already been struck between the Food Cart Vendor Association and the landlord of the building. And whatever has been struck between them, we are not getting in the middle of. You know what I mean?
I do. I hope the city weighs in on this. Thank you.
You're welcome. All righty. So with that, do I have any, all hands are down. Fantastic. So let's talk about resolution, which is what we need to get to this evening. Let's try and get to a straw poll to see where we are now, understanding, having seen the visuals, having seen this, and understanding where everyone's at. So I'm going to take a straw poll to see whether we would be yes with changes or no with changes. All right. And I'm going to ask Lucian to get that started.
Okay. Amy, would you like me just to roll call this?
For a roll call, and yes, please.
All right. So we'll start with in favor, but with modifications. Tammy,
Yes.
Alice,
Absolutely not. And I would go with the resolution that we originally wrote in 2018.
okay, Justine,
If I vote yes with modifications, what are the modifications?
That's what we need to
Talk about? Because, yeah, I would,
It's a yes on
I'm
the,
gonna go with yes with modifications, and then we'll talk about the modifications, because, yeah, at this point,
it's a straw poll just to see where we're going.
Jason.
No.
I'm sorry, did you say no?
Jason is a no.
Okay, thank you. Paul,
I'll go yes.
Mariama. I'll come back to you, Mariama. Betty,
Yes, even without modification.
Patrick. Patrick. Okay, moving on. Colin.
I honestly don't know. I want to hear what you say.
I didn't get that, Colin. Can everybody self, unless you're speaking for this straw poll, Colin, could you do a thumbs up for yes and a thumbs down for no? I can see your
Eating. I honestly don't know how to answer yet. I was hoping to hear what other people had to say.
okay. Patricia.
No, I don't want the carts on Liberty Street.
Brittany.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, going back to Mariama. Are you there? Patrick Cannell. Okay, Colin.
Sorry, you're gonna have to help me with this. I lean towards letting them do what they want to do with their property, so I guess I'm a yes.
Okay. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 6 to 3. Yes. That's your straw poll. Tammy.
All right. So if that's the straw poll, we need to work on what we're going to say, because there's a lot of opposition for many parts of this. There is also some strong proponents for just yes. So I want to be able to do a resolution that seeks some sort of compromise.
Well, Tammy, the first thing you need to do is to explain in the resolution why you are countering a resolution from 3 years ago, which does not want to include benches on the city sidewalk on Broadway. That's noted as a community board one. I think it was unanimously approved, so I think we need to make crystal clear why we are dialing this back. I can't imagine how you could have one resolution that says no, and one that says yes 3 years later.
Well,
So
heard. So, I mean, things that we've heard to start with are about the precedent that we set. Some people are concerned about the food carts on Liberty Street at all. Some people are concerned about some, not all. And others are concerned about them being on the pops itself. So the question is, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, it looks like 5 benches that are over on Broadway. So we could say that, we prefer that if we are going to say yes to the benches, that we either say yes as is or yes with changes. We got to a yes with changes, and the question are, what are the changes? That we would like to see no more than 1 cart over on Liberty Street, move another one over to Cedar, and keep one on Broadway, so not quite so much seating. That we don't agree with the benches as a permanent obstruction. That's where we need to figure out and get to. So I'm looking to hear dialogue that I haven't heard before for a way to move towards consensus, or at least a majority vote. Doesn't have to be 100%, certainly. Pat Moore, I'm starting with you. You said no food carts on Liberty. Are you yes for benches?
Is this a crazy idea? Why can't they move some of the benches to Liberty Street and move the carts to Cedar Street?
Because the benches are in the right way. Liberty Street is private property, which is already been declined by landmarks. So you can't put a permanent structure over there.
Okay.
So my question for you is, if the issue is the 3 carts over on Liberty, we're saying, okay, 1 should go to Cedar. Are we saying that the other stay on less benches?
They've been on Broadway forever. Why can't they stay on Broadway? Move. I could see maybe 1 on Liberty Street, but again, Liberty Street, as well as the school bus, it's a heavily trafficked street, more so than the Cedar Street side, in my opinion. And I think that you need to keep Liberty Street as clear as possible.
Okay. So that's a reduction in benches for moving the street vendors back to Broadway and
Right.
Okay. Justine?
So Pat took the words out of my mouth suggesting to move the benches to Liberty, but that's a definite no. So the other suggestion would be the idea of reducing the benches on Broadway and then allowing at least 1 more cart on Broadway. But part of that, I think, was an issue raised. I forget who did it. Somebody who was speaking was having an issue saying that if you leave the open space, carts will fill, or there'll be something will fill that maybe we don't want.
So
And
that's what Pat's saying, is take 2 carts, put them back. So get rid of 2 benches, put the 2 carts back there, and 1 cart on Cedar, so Liberty stays open.
And then Cedar stays with 2. So basically,
Cedar stays with 3. So the number of street vendors remains, but not the number of benches, less benches.
I would be good with that, and I think that's a more reasonable compromise, because we're hearing from a lot of different people that the benches are important, they're nice, whatever, people want to sit, okay, but I think that people's livelihood is at stake, and we need to respect that. And I don't think that goes against what we were saying in our old resolutions, because I remember trying to balance out the aesthetics of it all, and the pops and access to the pops with the business. These people make their lives and feed their families on this business. So
Okay, gotcha. Patrick.
Interrupt.
Can you read what the resolution said? Because it doesn't seem very helpful for people not to have received it and know that.
Alice, hang on a sec. I'm going through one by one to get everybody, and then we're going to come back. Lucian, if you can find the 2018. But it wasn't.
Tammy, why can't there be benches on Nassau Street?
At the back of the building? Whether there are benches on Nassau Street is not the conversation here, because the application is
Okay, but what I was, if we were reducing the benches on Cedar Street, wrap them around to Nassau Street, but I'll shut up.
The building, it's not really about, the building owner is looking to displace the vendors because they want a more open area in front of their building. It really isn't about the seating. The seating just accomplishes one of their goals. I don't mean to sound negative, but it's sort of clear on that.
Also, it's no longer about displacement. It's about just shifting, moving things around to do, as you said, open up the view corridor from the building to the park and vice versa. But there's no more displacement going on. That would suggest people are being sent away, and that's not happening.
Tammy, can I just say one thing to say that I think that all the parties have come together and really tried to address as many of the issues as possible. So I kind of applaud the changes, but I'm also hearing and respect a lot about what Alice is saying and what Pat is saying about the aesthetics and the open space. But I do respect the compromises here.
That's where I'm trying to get to, because I understand where we're all at. I mean, there's no doubt, I will say this 1,010 times, we do not agree with the change to put bike racks and food carts inside POPs. POPs are supposed to be seating. Everyone, privatizing the POPs that have been a public amenity that has been promised and maintained by putting city bike racks instead of seating.
I can't even hear what you're saying, so you should just go.
Brittany.
I don't think she's talking to you, Tammy.
I'm sad to hear that because I haven't heard her opinion yet.
Oh, sorry. I was off of mute. As you can hear. Sorry about that.
All right. So here's where I have so far from everybody who has spoken. Patrick, I think you were putting this. If we're saying yes to less benches, taking the 3 food vendors, 2 or 3 of them off Liberty, 1 to go to Cedar, and then the number of benches to be reduced to not have as many permanent seats there, and to put a food cart back on Broadway, correct?
Me? I hadn't weighed in exactly on that. I just had a concern about the compression of those 3 carts on Liberty. I don't know if they could be spaced out. Look, I'm not interested in redesigning the whole thing for them. I think we should just vote it up or down. But if there's a compromise sort of redesign that the committee would agree on, I'll go with that too. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on this. I think we should get there and move on.
Okay, I think.
I
have nothing. Alice, you get the last word before we call a vote.
Okay, I just would say that I think what's missing here is just to understand that this community board was in complete support of the street vendors by noting the following, and I'm going to read this so that everyone's clear what we fought. As a whereas, a number of small business street vendors attended the board meeting, concerned that the planters and benches on the city sidewalk on Broadway, which while consistent with DOT planter standards at the time, would result in their businesses being forced off the plaza. Now, CB1 recommends, as the original plaza design did not include the planters and benches on the city sidewalk of Broadway, that this element of the application be rejected. I'm only reading this to understand that by putting benches, you remove the street vendors. So I guess you have to ask yourself, do you want to remove the street vendors along Broadway? And that's the critical question. That's all.
Street vendors already came to an agreement for where they are. We can say,
You just need to hear what we wrote and why we wrote it. We were supportive of the street vendors. We were against additional. We wanted to preserve the integrity of the plaza, and both those things work together. And what we're doing here is we're trying to allow that we sort of stop the street vendors along Broadway. That's what's happening here. We need to find another place for them, and that's what we're doing. I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that because
the street vendors have approved this deal. So we're the ones now saying that we still have an issue with the unresolved part about too many benches. Colin.
Sorry, just before we vote, could you just make explicitly clear the intent of yes and the intent of no? That's all.
We're voting. We took a straw poll, and the straw poll was yes for modification. So yes, we approve some benches, not as designed with 5. We would only like to see a maximum of 3 because we would prefer that 2 of the vendors stay on Broadway, 1 or 2, and the other one be relocated to Cedar.
Thanks.
Can you also suggest that maybe those benches be put back on Liberty? No?
No, because the Liberty Street side, their landline goes into Liberty Street. So that is technically part of the POPs.
All right, call the question, please.
Okay, great. Lucian, take it away.
Okay, so this is the top line of the draft resolution would be that this is a resolution supporting the revocable consent application to add benches to the plaza or to Broadway's right of way. And then what we just add in what is there modification language going in there asking for them to try to shift vendors if possible, or is that a requirement? I'm sorry.
We are saying that we do not think that the quantity of benches, we don't like the quantity. We want to reduce the number of benches and provide access to have the street vendors on the Broadway side of the building.
All the street vendors?
We want 1 on Cedar, 2 on Broadway.
1 on Cedar, 2 on Broadway, or 2 on Liberty? Because they have 2 on Broadway right now.
2 more. What we're trying to do is get them off the POPs, which is the Liberty Street side, to leave that access fully open. And then if they're on Broadway and you've reduced the benches by 2, then there's more open space considerably. Then there's 3 benches on Broadway instead of 5, which is even better than the 7 I think that they started with.
Tammy, I believe the applicant is asking for an up or down vote on the design as presented. Is that something that the committee will consider?
If that's what he wants, then I think he's not going to be happy with the answer.
And I just also want to point out that if you move the 3 benches off the POPs, meaning the 3 benches on Liberty Street, and you move them all out of there, the city bike will come back there.
No,
So-
not all 3 food trucks. Move 1 or 2 back to Liberty Street. And then why would the city bike come back there if we're saying we don't want it there?
It's already
That would be something to
there.
say.
The city bike is already approved to be there. So if we're not going to move the city bike down and put the 3 vendors there, then the city bike would go back into its former location and it would be there. Can I offer a design modification for your consideration, which would be, I understand the issue about whether or not a vendor should be on a POPs at all, and I'm not going to try and address that question. But as an urban designer and a landscape architect, I completely understand the concern over the proximity of a vendor to the cube, Gucci's famous cube. I get that. I sympathize with that concern. So what I can offer as a designer is take one of those 3 vendors that's on the one that's closest to the cube, move them to Cedar Street, pull the vendors closer together, and the 2 vendors that are still on Cedar Street on the POPs, pull them down as close as we can to the ramp and put them together, take out the space between the vendors, and we will create a comfortable distance from the vendors to the cube, I feel. That's just my personal recommendation for design modification. And that way we keep the 5 benches and we keep all the vendors.
So
on the block.
flipping 2 carts on Liberty, 3 on Cedar.
Right, and compressing them together so that there's more space there.
It still doesn't get into the account the fact that we did pass a resolution saying that we didn't want planters or permanent benches on Broadway at all. So that's a bit of a problem. You know, we're trying to find a compromise, and that's why I was asking about reducing the number of benches as well on Broadway. But, so, committee, we just need to vote and move on. Betty. And then I'm going to call the question.
Right, I was going to make the question for the clarification. It's not really going back so much on another resolution. I would clarify it in a whereas. And that original resolution did not, it shouldn't have been opined on the plaza. It should not have been opining on the right of way, which is what this is about.
We did. We said that we recommended the original plaza design did not include planters or benches on the city sidewalk on Broadway.
And that's not the plaza.
No. We said on the city sidewalk, and it was an element that should be rejected. We did comment on it during our landmark thing, even though it wasn't under the purview of landmark.
Can I ask one more question?
Yep.
So if we, and what would this be for the design? If you're trying, it sounds like the only reason why the designers care about the permanent benches is to block the space from other uses.
Correct.
So why not put, instead of permanent benches on Broadway, the chairs that somebody had suggested, chairs and a table.
That's not what this application is.
And they want to make that wouldn't be a friendly amendment to this application.
No, that's not what this application is. And we can evolve from what we said in 2018. We just need to move forward, right? So I did a straw poll. We got to where we are today. The applicant has said that they are willing to open up Liberty Street a little bit more. This is where we are, and I want to call the question.
Okay, I second the question. I second.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, here we go. Give me 1 second. All right, here we go. Meltzer,
Yes.
Blank,
No.
Kucha,
Yes.
Friedman,
I'm a no because the stuff got moved into the plaza without us knowing.
Goldstein,
Yes.
James, Joyce,
Abstain.
Kay,
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry, I muted, sorry.
Cannell,
Yes.
Lewinson, Lewinson, Mahoney,
Yes.
Moore, Pat,
Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
What's your vote, Pat?
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
You heard the no?
Okay. No, I did not.
Okay.
Wade?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, the ayes have it.
Okay. Moving on. Next.
Okay, here we go. Moving on. Thank you, Mr. Andres, Bo, and Mr. Shapiro. I'm going to be pulling up.
Our next item is city-funded programs by the City Development Block Grant. which will have a resolution, and then we have two more to come. We can cut committee reports unless there's anything that anybody says is going to be highly controversial. Otherwise, at 7:42, I'm proposing that we go city programs, 402 Comfort, 88 Wall, and then we're done. So, Lucian, let's keep moving.
Sure thing. Okay, so I'm going to bring up, let's see, I'm sorry, this document. So the Community Development Block Grant is a federal program that was started in the 1970s. Oh my gosh, I have scrolled through this so much in preparation. I forgot to get to the first page again. The Community Development Block Grant is administered by HUD. It's a big chunk of money that goes directly to municipalities in order for them to run important programs that benefit those of middle income and low income. The city proposes how they'll use the Community Development Block Grant program, and HUD works with them directly. For smaller municipalities in the state of New York, they'll work with HCR, but New York being quite a bit larger than all the others, doesn't have to do that. So there isn't necessarily a need to have a resolution for this item, though if the committee is so moved to do one, they are certainly welcome to do so. But the important part about going over this information is it builds upon the committee chair's knowledge of the city's budget process and how different agencies and programs within those agencies are funded. So moving along, I just want to make you familiar with this document because it is very information rich, and it shows lots of different elements as well as the changes between this year and the previous year, which is important because there are COVID-19 response implications here, as well as other sorts of efficiency improvements and other kind of organizational changes. But I want to just go through a quick overview here because we don't have to step through every single page in depth, but many of you will be interested to know that there are kind of surprise agency programs that are funded, not simply the social support agencies. So you'll see that there are programs for housing, planning for housing, fair housing, code enforcement, emergency repair. This would support lots of affordable housing programs, program monies for different programs for peoples with disabilities, public facilities, landmark historic preservation grant programs. That was a bit of a surprise for me. I didn't know that there are programs like that funded through the block grant. Open space, green thumb, recreation. This is something that we'll see a lot in our district. There's shelters and associated services. HPD and the Department of Homeless Services are two agencies that are funded vastly by federal monies. Public health and safety planning. So also Avenue NYC, which is of importance to small business support, and it has become a bit of an omnibus program for fiscal year 22, including programmatic initiatives from cultural fairs as well, from what I picked up. Also, there's important information here about DOE school kitchen renovations, daycares, city educational facilities. So there's definitely a lot to break into, and it really we would encourage every chair to kind of look under the relevant agency umbrella. You'll get an idea of the changes from the fiscal year. Now, the numbers here are in millions of dollars, so the scale is enormous. And what I want to point you to in terms of really getting to the specifics is in the near the middle. You can actually read about each program and the city agencies that are associated with it, as well as descriptions and other supporting materials. So this this document here has gone out to all the members. It's available to the public through the link that's on the website live.mcb1.nyc. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But I present this to you as an information resource in preparation for our budget discussions.
And Lucian, we're going to have you share that with everybody. It's scintillating bedtime reading.
Yes, yes. I'll certainly be reading this over.
Definitely cures insomnia. All right. let's keep going. And thank you very much. I know there's a ton of hard work that you've done on that, and I really appreciate that. We'll share that, and we will be moving forward on that. Let's talk about 402 Comfort Road for Governor's Island, an application for a liquor license for the Pizza Yard Holdings, DBA Pizza Yard. People will understand that these two resolutions and discussion items saying come forward from licensing, which lost quorum. So here we are.
Jennifer, do you want me to give you the presentation stuff?
Sure, you can use the draft resolution and the summary sheet. Sure, give me 1 minute.
Okay, they're yours now.
We also have the attorney for this application here with us tonight. Their name is Martha Rido. I'm not sure if it's okay if I can move her up to the panelist to speak or just unmute her. Or Lucian, you can unmute her.
I'll move her over. What's the attorney's name?
Martha Rido. Thank you.
Martha Rito. Wonderful. Okay. Ms. Rito, you are now able to unmute yourself.
Martha, are you with us? Lucian, can you ping her? Because I want to move on. So if she's not going to be here, she's going to certainly. There you
Jennifer.
go. Martha.
Okay, we may want to go to the.
Let's move on.
Right item. Yep.
Yep.
So Manuel Toscano says that he's the owner and present and can present. Mr.
Perfect.
Toscano, you are now able to unmute yourself.
And then Lucian, can you do me a favor? Move Brittany Wade over. And Peter and Jeff. Thank you.
Hello. Apologies for my attorney, Martha. Her microphone is not working.
No problem. Welcome.
She can call in. The number's on, so we're happy to have her call in.
I think she was trying to call in. So thank you. We have an application for a beer and wine seasonal for Governor's Island. It's an outdoor pizzeria, and that's it.
Hello, I'm on the phone. Can anybody hear me?
I've unmuted you, Martha.
Can you hear me on the phone?
Loud and clear.
Okay, I've been on all night. I just
so sorry. Keep going.
That's okay. I couldn't get my microphone on the computer, so I'm watching it on the computer, but I've got my phone on at the same time. I apologize. This is an application for it's a summer seasonal tavern wine license for beer and wine on Governor's Island. So it's an obviously open air on Governor's Island. There are 11 picnic type tables with seating for about 66. The hours, as it says on the show on the screen, is 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. There will likely be music, but only, I believe, for private events. Manuel might speak otherwise, but that's my understanding. There's no stand-up bar. The only bar is actually the pickup and order counter at Pizza Yard.
That's correct. We may have some background music playing.
And it's a daily 11 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay. So, Jen, I think we're going to do a hands up if anybody has any questions. This I'm hoping will be an easy one. I see Colin and Patrick, your hands are up.
I was just going to call the question, but if Patrick has a question, he should go first.
Just a super quick question on the applicants for either of these. Is the Trust for Governor's Island an applicant on any of them, or is it just the individual establishments?
The licensee applicant is only Pizza Yard Holdings, LLC.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. If you're good, I don't see any other hands up. I'll go to Colin, and Colin, you are?
Calling the question.
Beautiful. Okay. I will take this as an affirmation vote. So I'm going to assume I'm going to call for, are there any objections? Are there any recusals? Are there any abstentions? Thus hearing none. Oh, did I hear somebody? Thus hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
I'll record that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next. This one is a dicey one that has come out of committee to executive, and I call it dicey because there's been, is the applicant here as well, Jen?
They're not here, but we do have their representative with us, Mastin Sansom. He's on the attendees list.
Perfect. Let's move he and Peter over. Peter is joining us on behalf of our council member's office because this has to do with legislation.
Peter, I can't move you over to panels for some reason, but I will unmute you, so you're able to mute and unmute yourself at your.
Okay. So, Mastin.
Yes.
You are the applicant. Welcome. Please explain why you're here. And
Sure. Absolutely. So, thank you. First, let me thank everyone. I know it's getting late here. So I represent the applicant. In this case, it's more I represent the owner of 88 Wall Street, the owner of the building. And they are hoping to become an applicant that would then appear before the licensing committee prior to submitting any application for a liquor license. But as a little bit about the bill, prior to the repeal of prohibition in 1934 in New York State, there were many cases where manufacturers would sort of strong arm retailers to carry their products. You can think of kind of sort of the Al Capone days, and they would insist that retailers carry their products, and as I said, kind of strong arm them. So they included what's called the Tied House laws. These Tied House laws in New York are more strict than the federal laws. And they basically say that if you're a manufacturer, so if you're a brewer, for example, you can't have any interest in a retail licensee, so which would be a bar or a restaurant or something like that. So, and these interests, the law states, which again was passed in 1934, states they cannot have any interest, direct or indirect. And again, it was to get at, undue influence from the manufacturers over the retailers. Well, as the decades have progressed, that type of undue influence has greatly subsided. The law is still on the books, and there have been many examples that have required an exemption to the law because there was basically no chance of undue influence whatsoever. But the very broad nature of the law, saying that an interest direct or indirect, precluded a lot of like business relationships between a manufacturer and a retailer. So in this case, 88 Wall Street owns a winery in Australia. They also purchased this hotel on 88 Wall Street, which is going to include a restaurant. Well, in order for them to be on the license or even apply for a license, they would need this Tied House exemption, which again, this has been done probably at least a dozen times, maybe even 24 times. There are many, it's kind of tough to read when you look at the statute. There are a bunch of meets and bounds descriptions that are kind of melded together. So it's tough to see how many times it's been done. But this would provide an exemption. So would essentially allow the owner of the building to be eligible to get to be a co-licensee on the liquor license. The owner would, it's very important to say that while the owner does own a winery in Australia, they do not import any of their products into the United States. So the chance of undue influence is non-existent. And also, for that matter, the type of undue influence that the law was intended to prevent was kind of vast undue influence, over many retailers. And this law, if passed, or this bill, if passed into law, would only provide a tied house exemption for this specific parcel of land. And also, at the request of the legislators, there is also a provision at the end that would restrict the exemption only to the current owner of the property. So when the property is no longer owned by that owner, that law will be repealed, is basically automatically repealed.
So
and that's
questions for you.
I'm sorry?
Questions for you. 88 Wall is a current hotel.
Yes.
Are you currently operating a liquor license?
It's in the conditional approval phase, so it's been, it was under construction, and construction, of course, was delayed a bit due to COVID. So, but they are anticipating opening in the next few months. And when I say conditional approval phase, basically they need to submit final photos and a few final documents. Once all those are submitted to the liquor authority, the license is traditionally issued within about 48 hours.
And was the applicant who owns the winery on the initial temporary license? Or is this an ownership change?
So because the owner of the building, right now, the management company is on the license and the concessionaire is on the license. Per SLA policies, if you add an owner as opposed to a concessionaire, you have to file a new application. So you can't just file an endorsement application. So a whole new application would have to be filed to add the owner, which would, of course, again, come before the licensing committee. One of the important parts about this is there are two reasons, two sort of big reasons of why this would be helpful to the community. One is a practical reason. If the current owner or the current operator, a concessionaire and things like that, if they wanted to leave, or if for whatever reason they wanted to exit the property or did exit the property, the owner could still then provide some sort of food service because they would be on the license. If they're not on the license, then they have to file for a whole new license with a whole new vendor, which then would result in a break-in service to the community that hopefully becomes reliant and likes to enjoy this premises and the food that will be offered. A second is sort of a philosophical argument, which is, I would think anyone would want the owner of the premises to be on the license and held responsible for adhering to the same stipulations that the food and beverage operator, is responsible for. Because if they are a co-licensee, then the community board could come to them and say, look, hey, if they had windows and doors open beyond the stated times and the stipulations, the owner is somebody that they could reach out to and say, look, you stipulated that you wouldn't do this, and you can hold them accountable and which will help ensure that the stipulations are followed. Otherwise, the owner technically would not be really responsible for meeting the requirements of the stipulations. So I'm not sure if you're muted or if I'm
going to stop here. Thank you so much. It was me. I'm going to do hands up. I also have a question for you because I know this. When did you file for your temporary liquor license? Why is it taking so long to come here? And why is this so urgent that it has to be done now?
Sure. So first, there was no temporary liquor license that was applied for. Just the full liquor license was applied for because there was going to be some construction. So a temporary license wasn't needed. And in the meantime, because the owner was aware, was made aware that they could not be on the license unless legislation was passed, they decided to move forward with just having the manager and the concessionaire on the license. And in the meantime, try to move forward with some legislation. Well, as you know, legislation, of course, is a very deliberative process that can take a while. Well, so for over a year now, we've been working on the legislation. And that's kind of where we're at now. The hotel is being, redone and everything. The legislation has kind of moved forward, and now we're here. The sponsors, Senator Kavanaugh, as well as Assembly Member New, and Peter, who has been absolutely wonderful, staff of Assembly Member New's office. They asked if we would reach out to the community board and ask for some input to try and get a letter of support or a letter of no objection related to the legislation. So we, and it was my understanding that some people, at least from Senator Kavanaugh's office, had spoken with the community board. So we reached out by asking for a letter. And we're told that, in order to get anything really, you're not comfortable just providing a letter, but why don't you come in, meet the community board again, talk to them, tell them all about it. So that's what we did for the licensing. And the licensing committee was like, a little bit like, why even here? This is legislation.
Stop.
So, yep.
Stop. Thank you. No offense, I'm cranky. I'm hangry. All right. I'm going to do hands up. We're going to start with Colin.
Tammy, I'm sorry, did you say a member of the assembly or a staff member was here to help us understand this?
Absolutely. So let's get Peter. Peter?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Peter from Assembly Member News office. So just to clarify on this specific bill, Eileen has not made a final decision on whether or not to introduce this piece of legislation. As Maston mentioned, basically what the bill would do is it would provide an exemption for 88 Wall Street from the tied house regulations, so that they would be able to apply for a new liquor license under the owner of 88 Wall Street. So the assembly member has not made her decision on whether or not we want to sponsor the bill yet. So, as Maston mentioned, we want to solicit some community board feedback before we decide to move on whether or not to introduce or not introduce the bill. So that's where we are currently right now.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up, if it's okay, Timmy.
Absolutely, go for it.
Peter, what do you see? I hate to ask you to be forthright and speak on behalf of your boss here, but what do you see as potential drawbacks of this?
So as far as I can see, as Maston mentioned, there have been tied house exemptions that were made before, and honestly, from my point of view, if there have been tied house exemptions provided before, they would still have to go back to the community board for the application. So, they would have to reapply to you guys, talk about the impacts of having a liquor license. They would still have to go through the process with the SLA. In terms of concerns, we ran the language through the SLA. The biggest concern that we had personally was that, if the property was transferred to another owner, then there would still be an exemption applied. So as Maston also mentioned, we had worked through amendments to the language saying that if there was a transfer in the ownership of 88 Wall Street that the exemption would no longer apply. So that was my biggest concern. The other concern is, whether or not the community board would be supportive of this in the first place. I just want to make sure Yulene just wants to also take into account the community board's opinion on having a liquor license application at 88 Wall Street. And if this is something that, you guys are not supportive of, that's definitely something to take into account as we move on with the process.
I think it's smart to amend it to make sure it's not a long-lasting or a permanent exemption to the next owner. So that's all I need to do here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Colin. That's super cool. Jeff Ehrlich, you have your hand up. And I see no other board members with hands up, so we're going to Jeff Ehrlich. Jeff?
And Tammy, just gonna say, there's a couple of board members that got bumped to the attendee list. Maybe they got bumped off and are coming back in, I think.
Brittany and Tricia, I see them. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Tammy. You can hear me?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. I'm here on behalf of Susan, I guess. I was not at the meeting, but I did listen to the recording of it. Mastin, a couple of questions. Well, first, what the committee did, the application was very confusing because it basically presented the legislation and asked the committee to support the legislation. And usually the community board hears from the electeds first, or at least with it. So this was asking for basically what seemed like a change in the ABC law for the SLA. So what she wanted to do was just bring it to executive and have them possibly come back after meeting with the electeds. But Mastin, let me ask you a couple of questions because I've discussed this with Susan.
Sure.
Hi. First, you said that on the SLA site, there are actually three. Well, I should say that licensing approved the hotel with no problems back at least a year ago. So there are three pending licenses on the SLA site, one of which has 7 principals. So you said there are only 2?
Entities.
These are individual names. So
yeah.
Okay.
So principals, individual principals. Yes, there would be anyone who has an ownership interest. To make it kind of concise, they have to be on the license. Yes.
Well, is any of those 7 the guy in Australia?
No.
Oh, okay. Also, the legislation was, again, confusing because it's not just for 88 Wall Street. It's for someplace in Ontario County, way up north in the state.
Oh,
so the committee would be approving that in addition, an exemption for them.
Yeah, no, let me just clarify that. It may look like that. If you look at, so the Senator Kavanaugh introduced a bill. It's Senate Bill number 6781. But it's a little confusing because
Okay.
If you look at the, yeah. If you take a look at the bill that I mentioned, if you're able to, green, the language highlighted in green is all the other language. Those are tied house exemptions that were previously passed at different times.
All right, so it's just a holdover on the, okay.
It's just how the bill drafting does it.
Okay.
State bill drafting commission.
Okay. There was some drop ball somewhere because the committee had what was presented showed the legislation. It had a list of all the legislators, and there was no sponsor listed. And where it says, you know, the people circled below support this, nobody was circled. So that's why the committee basically said, look, we can't deal with this right now.
Yep, and I understand, and I apologize for all of the confusion. That was because this legislation, as you can see, or if you're able to look at, Senator Kavanaugh just introduced it on the 17th, which I believe was Monday. And so when I had met with the committee, the members of the legislature wanted me to at least meet with you before even introducing the legislation. So the legislation was not even, it wasn't legislation yet. It was a pure proposal. So there were, you know, it was in its most basic form. So some of the information that you referenced just wasn't there yet because it wasn't an actual bill. And now that it is a bill, at least in the Senate, it's still, as you can see, it's in the investigations committee. There's only, you know, 2 weeks left in the, maybe 3 in the legislative session. And it still has to go through the entire committee process. And at any given time, anybody obviously can weigh in and you know, during that time and provide comments. So it's still got a ways to go. This is its very first beginning process. And as Peter noted, Assemblymember New has not committed to introducing it. So right now it's just a one House bill. You know, obviously we're very hopeful that Assemblymember New, with your consultation, would agree to introduce it.
And I just want to confirm, this changes nothing in terms of your SLA requirements to return to the community board for any changes for anything in your liquor license now and in forever. And if this gentleman comes off your ownership list, you will still have to file change of ownership. And then the legislation is null and void. If somebody else came back with the same thing, you'd have to go through this whole thing again.
1,000,000%. It does not change any of the application process fees and notices and appearing before the board. Doesn't change any of that whatsoever. It's specific exemption for the tied house issue alone.
Okay.
One other question, Tammy?
Please, Jeff, go ahead.
Just somebody was asking what could possibly go wrong. Assuming, what if the guy in Australia, who I assume makes wonderful wine, decides to export it and to expand his business? What happens to the legislation?
Well, quite frankly, just candidly, he would be able to, I mean, so even if this legislation wasn't here, if it never gets passed, he could import it and then the hotel could buy it. But after this legislation, but he wouldn't be able to be on the license though. So, but after this legislation hopefully passes, of course, he would, and hopefully he gets a license. As the co-licensee, he's probably going to want to buy some of his wine because I think he must think he makes great wine as well. So theoretically, he could, as the co-licensee, say, I am only carrying my wine and no one else's wine. Now, and the only place he could do that is there. Now, would he do that? Would that be great? Probably not.
That's,
you know,
what the law is there to prevent. So quite frankly, if that's even a speck in the conversation, Peter already sees where we're going to go on this. The law is specifically there to prevent monopolizing of the situation.
Yes, I understand. I certainly understand your point. But I believe by monopolization, I think it's more viewed, the intent of the law is more on a much broader scale. It's not one entity. So for example, in New York State, if I opened up a brewery, I'm actually able to open up 5 separate, what are called branch offices. Each of these branch offices can have their own bars and everything. So technically, if I were a New York State brewery, I could make them carry only my stuff. But that's a carve out. It's really, the law has evolved in such a weird way that this old tied house law is prohibitive. It's excessively prohibitive in many respects, where many other carve outs have occurred for other types of entities. But I'd like to stress that, again, the tied house law is not necessarily concerned about someone carrying their own product at one place. They're more concerned about, taking 100 restaurants throughout the state and making all of them carry only their wines, which again would not be a very good business decision, I don't think, but on that type of scale, which is why these tied house exemptions are really allowed, because they are so narrowly tailored. It's specific in the metes and bounds to only that property. So even a worst case scenario, which there are instances where the tied house law was carved out specifically just for that. And yes, they do carry their, liquor produced by the manufacturer. But it's such a limited, or such a narrow, limited exemption. There's no chance for a broad-based monopolization.
Jeff, you good?
You would have to get
Yeah, I'm
carve-outs for each every. Yeah, you would have to get a carve-out for each and every other location. Yes.
Let me go to the community board. All right,
Okay.
anybody else have questions? Peter, Colin has his hand up. Peter, Gerald has their hand up. So Colin, you've spoken once. Let's get Gerald Forsberg from the attendee section, and then Peter to close this out. Lucian, can you unmute Gerald, please?
Yep, here I go.
So in my limited understanding of this, would this legislation extend to wine importers, distributors, and retailers as well? Because as it is right now, my understanding is you cannot be a distributor and a retailer in the city.
Yes, that's, so I'm not, yeah, that's the tied house law, that you can't be a distributor and a retailer. But this would only allow this would only apply to this specific location and this specific owner, because the bill is drafted in a way that would essentially be repealed after the building is sold. So it wouldn't apply to any other retailers, any other distributors. It doesn't make a broad-based change to that prohibition. It creates this very narrow exemption, just like it did in Oswego. And that, like I said, there's a dozen or two or more other locations that have also obtained these exemptions all across the state.
Gerald, any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks a lot. Colin, you're back to you, and then Peter, you're gonna have closing words.
Yeah, I was just gonna try and close it out, to be honest here, but I know this is just a discussion. We're not taking any action, but it just seems very logical for me, for the community board to take a cue from the legislature, from the assembly, to see what they do before we even opine, because I'm not comfortable voting on this. It seems perfectly harmless to me, totally harmless, but if there's pending state legislation out there, we should just wait to see what happens there, in my opinion. That's all.
They will not present the legislation unless we do a resolution saying it's okay.
Oh, God. Okay.
Thank you. That's where I'm going. Peter, am I correct on that?
You know, so here's the thing. A resolution would be helpful, but not necessary. You know,
Ooh,
honestly,
Aha!
I like that.
yeah, like the thing is with this specific legislation, like I said, it would still have to go through, even if this bill passed, it would still have to go through, the applicant would still have to go through the community board, they would still have to go through the SLA, they would still have to go through,
After.
you know, all the regular channels after, right?
Yeah.
So my biggest thing here is that you know, we want to take a temperature check from the community board as to what they think of the applicant for one, and then two, you know, about the applicant, you know, expanding or changing the ownership of the license to the owner of 88 Wall Street. So we just want to take a temperature check. Yulene has not decided on whether or not she would like to sponsor this bill
I'd like
yet.
to take your temperature check. There's a lot of buck passing along here, but
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So, full transparency, we are meeting with the owners of 88 Wall Street. We're planning to meet with the owners either later this week or early next week to sort of feel them out as well. So we'll be happy to report back on the developments there. But, you know, we always want to check back in with the community to see, you know, how you guys feel. And, you know, if you guys think it's okay, then that will definitely help Yulene make her decision. But yeah, you know, if things are okay with you guys, I'll be glad to bring it back to Yulene, but we are meeting with
I see Justine has her hand up, Betty has a hand up, Patrick has a hand up, and so that's the order I'm going.
I guess I just have a question. Thanks, Tammy. Is I'm not sure that there's a clear. I don't think I have enough information, and I'm not sure that the committee, the licensing committee, got enough information from the community as to what our temperature is on this. Is that kind of where Colin's going with it? I think we need more information, wouldn't you think?
So here we have all the information we need. The problem is he's under a timeline that had Mascot come to us in January, February, or March, they would not be under the timeline that they are. So their lack of scheduling is not our personal emergency, it is theirs.
Right.
They should have come to us in Q1.
Yeah.
Because they knew they were already doing this and explained and had an opportunity. They didn't. The legislature stopped June 10th or 9th, whatever it is. So that's where we are.
So I guess that makes sense. I guess my feeling about it is that unless you know, Jeff and Susan and their committee is comfortable having heard from the people who live by 88 Wall Street and have some information from the neighbors.
Nothing to do with the liquor license yet. They will still have to come back to us to apply for a liquor license and do all of that. This is about the legislation and whether or not you say yay or nay for them to have an exemption on the legislation. One does not do the other. Okay? It's not about life issues. It's not about any of that yet.
All right, and without the legislation, they can't proceed. So the nice thing for us to do is to kind of say yes.
Correct. He cannot be on the license. All right. Betty, you're next.
Thank you. I was going to say, so I just want to make sure I have you correct. Did you say that with these owners, with this particular individual from Australia, the hotel could buy his product if his name is off the license? It's just if he's on the license, it becomes illegal under the current law unless the legislation changes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so the situation could exist if he really wanted to monopolize it with his own winery. All he'd have to do is keep his name off the license and let his partners be on it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Patrick.
Yeah, just 2 quick points. First of all, 88 Wall Street has been undergoing a years-long renovation, and I think it's going to work out to be a beautiful building. But The bigger point is, we're talking about a small exception for one property, one investor in that property. We're talking about all these small businesses that need to come back and all the small businesses we want to encourage to get online. I think it is a great thing to encourage those small businesses when we would be in favor of an exemption like this, particularly when it's only a green light to go to the licensing committee. I think it's a no-brainer. We should support it.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, seeing no further hands up, I'm going to do this as a resolution simply because I want there to be no doubt into what we're doing. It's a really yay or nay. We support the legislation, the approval. We support the legislation for the waiver for this individual, for this location, at this time, period. Because if any of those things change, then it's meaningless. They have to start again. Okay? All right, so I'm going to go the way we did before. So I'm going to assume everyone is a yay. Let's see for abstentions first.
Mahoney.
Mahoney abstains. Any other abstentions?
Blank.
Blank abstains. Any other abstentions? Okay, flat nose. Hearing none, anyone who is recused? Perfect. So with that, motion passes committee, and it'll be voted on at the full board, Maston, next week. Peter, thank you for coming. Thank you for explaining, Maston. Next time, if you come, please come fully prepared to the committee vote, because no offense intended, that is where it needs to be, not in my executive committee. Okay?
To the full board, you're saying?
Next time you come about liquor license anything,
Yeah.
just make sure whoever you need to have with you is with you at licensing. Okay, so all questions can be answered.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
In a concise manner.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you very much. And Peter, thank you for jumping.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So for my community board team, it's 8:29. I do think that we can pass, unless I'm going to give a shout out. If you have an emergency, that you think it's going to be highly controversial beyond anything that was discussed tonight, please let us know. Do not give your full board report. I'm just going to go committee by committee, call you. If you've got nothing, say, great, we'll see you at the full board. Betty, I already know you have something contentious because you've got congestion pricing.
Oh, shit. Oh.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. But in fact, it's been ongoing for months, so I don't really have much to say.
Perfect.
Others in past, and if anyone has concerns, I suggest they go look at the tape of the last this month's meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Patrick Cannell, land use. Any emergencies that will be highly controversial?
See you at the full board.
Alice.
No. See you later.
Awesome. Colin, I'll assume that part of your subcommittee, you're good. Elizabeth,
everyone that the IRS copied our resolution.
Oh, I forgot. I almost forgot. That's right. Colin, you need to brag. This is a good brag. Go, Colin.
So the city largely ignored our resolutions, but the federal government and President Joe Biden copied our employee retention proposal, and it's now law of the IRS.
Wow. That's so cool. That is so cool.
I mean, it's maybe a stretch to say they copied us, but
so
we did it first.
Go with it. Take that. Run that line.
Take a win when you get there. All right. Thank you, Colin. All right. Elizabeth Lewinson, anything for personnel?
Nope, nothing.
Thank you. Jason, landmarks.
Nothing here.
Okay. Thank you. Justine, Battery Park City.
No, nothing controversial. We didn't get there yet. We'll be talking about ground rent, and I might talk a little bit about ground rent, but no reso. So see you later.
Awesome. Pat Moore, anything we should worry about? I know you're not.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the resos we'll have, people will mostly agree with.
Okay. Paul Goldstein.
The wayfinding signs, we did a resolution on, so I'm sure there will be some comments on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Trisha Joyce, Youth and Ed.
A little bit maybe. We have a resolution that is going to ask for a mandate on vaccines for teachers and school workers. And that'll be controversial, I imagine.
Okay, perfect.
Interesting. What about for not your committee, but what about for subway and transit workers? Same thing.
That could be something that Betty Kay can take up next month.
Oh, and I also want to say, because I said it without any context, we also need to take care of teachers who cannot have the vaccine. So
Yep.
it's going, and we also have, lots of parameters about ventilated buildings. So we're taking care of the vulnerable people in our city while we're also making sure our kids go back to school. And right now we do not have enough people in the school system to support that. So.
Okay. I think with that, that is it. I'm assuming that Betty's hands and Patrick's hands are old. Lucian, do you have anything else to close it out?
Nope, nothing comes to mind.
Fantastic. With that, everybody,
Hold my hand.
thank you very much. It's 8:33. Really appreciate meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Tammy. Bye.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, everybody.